The excavator's massive steel bucket hung frozen in mid-air, seconds away from completing its deadly arc. Something moved in what should have been empty soil. In the freshly torn earth lay a family of newborn bobcat kittens, seconds away from being buried alive. Maya Torres stepped forward to see what had stopped everything, and her heart seized. The foreman cleared his throat, uneasy. "Orders, boss?" "We're already behind schedule." One day lost costs tens of thousands. Maya's heart was pounding. On one side, a deadline that could define her career. On the other, trembling lives. She tightened her grip on the blueprints. The weight of her decision pressed down harder than any steel beam. The foreman looks to his boss, waiting for the order. Would she sacrifice everything she'd worked for? Or sacrifice them? Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The Florida sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the sprawling construction site in the small town of Oak Haven. It was only 9 in the morning, but the air was already thick and soupy, shimmering above the raw red earth. For Maya Torres, it was the symphony of progress. The deafening growl of a bulldozer carving a new road, the rhythmic clang of steel beams being set, and the hydraulic hiss of the excavator, its massive bucket tearing into a patch of stubborn palmetto scrub. At 28, Maya was the youngest site engineer her company had ever put in charge of a $1 million project. This sprawling commercial development wasn't just a job, it was her proving ground. Every blueprint she clutched in her hand, every calculation she ran, was a testament to years of sleepless nights and relentless ambition. Her hard hat was tipped low, casting a sliver of shade over her focused eyes as she watched the excavator work. They were behind schedule. A week of torrential rain had turned the site into a mud pit, and now the pressure from the investors was as intense as the midday heat. Her foreman, a burly, sun-weathered man named Mike, wiped a thick forearm across his brow. "She's eating through that scrub now, boss," he yelled over the mechanical roar. "Should have this section cleared by lunch." Maya nodded, her mind already jumping ahead to the foundation pour scheduled for the next day. The schedule was a fragile house of cards. One more delay, and the whole thing could come tumbling down. She was so lost in the logistics of concrete and rebar that she barely registered the change in the excavator's rhythm. A sudden, jerky halt. The engine whined down, and an unnatural silence fell over the site, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of unseen birds. Then a shout cracked through the air, raw with panic. "Hold up! Stop! Stop the bucket!" It was Sal, the excavator operator, his voice tight with alarm. He was leaning out of the cab, his face pale beneath his tan. Every head on the site turned. Work ground to a halt. Maya's heart gave a hard, nervous thud. An accident? A buried utility line? She strode forward, her boots crunching on the gravelly soil. Mike was already there, peering into the shallow pit the excavator had just dug. "What is it, Sal?" Maya asked, her voice sharp with authority she didn't quite feel. I don't know," Sal stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "The ground. It just sort of collapsed. I thought it was a root ball, but then I saw something move." Maya stepped to the edge of the torn earth. The bucket of the massive machine hung frozen in the air, a steel behemoth poised over a scene of profound fragility. At first, all she saw was a chaotic mess of shredded palmetto roots and dark soil. It was the disturbed den of some unseen creature. Then her eyes adjusted. Nestled in the dirt was a tiny ball of spotted fur, no bigger than a man's fist. It trembled, a miniature body racked with confusion and fear. As she watched, a tiny pink mouth opened, and the faintest sound emerged. A raspy, desperate mewl. A collective gasp went through the crew of hardened construction workers who had gathered around. Mike let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "A bobcat." Maya knelt, her professional composure melting away. Another movement caught her eye. A second kitten, its coat matted with dirt, blinked weakly in the harsh, unfiltered sunlight. Its eyes were a startling pale blue, full of a bewildered innocence that struck Maya to her core. For the first time all morning, the construction site fell utterly, profoundly silent. The symphony of progress had been replaced by the nearly inaudible cries of newborn life. Mike cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. He looked from the kittens to Maya, his expression a mixture of awe and unease. "Orders, boss?" he asked softly. "You know the deal. We're already behind schedule. One day lost costs tens of thousands." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Tens of thousands. The investors, the deadlines, her career. Maya's pulse hammered in her ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. She looked at the blueprint still clutched in her hand, crisp, clean lines representing a future of concrete and commerce. Then she looked down at the trembling, dirt-caked creatures, their entire world destroyed in a single metallic scoop. On one side was the life she had fought so hard to build for herself. On the other, lives that had just begun, hanging by the thinnest of threads. She tightened her grip on the blueprints, the paper crinkling in her fist. The weight of her decision felt heavier than any steel beam, more immense than any building she could ever hope to construct. She took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of diesel and disturbed earth. "Shut it down," she said. Her voice was firm, cutting through the silence with an unwavering finality. She pointed to the area around the den. "Shut down all machinery in this sector. I want a 50-foot perimeter. Nobody gets any closer. This area is off limits until I say so." Mike looked at her, his eyes searching her face. He saw no hesitation, no doubt. He saw a commander. A slow smile spread across his weathered features, and he nodded. "You got it, boss." He turned to the crew. "You heard her? Kill the engines. Let's give these little critters some room." A murmur of assent rippled through the men. No one argued. The tension that had held them all captive broke, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Maya stood up, pulling out her phone. She knew exactly who to call. Her fingers flew across the screen, dialing a number she had saved years ago, back when she'd found an injured hawk as a college student. Within the hour, a white van rumbled down the dusty access road, the distinctive logo of Big Cat Rescue stenciled on its side. As it pulled to a stop, the site felt less like a construction zone and more like a triage unit. Out stepped Carol Baskin, her presence exuding a practiced, reassuring calm, followed by her husband, Howard, and 2 other team members. They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen this 100 times before, yet treated each instance with the gravity it deserved. Carol's eyes swept the scene, taking in the silent excavator, the concerned faces of the construction crew, and Maya, who stood waiting. "Site engineer?" Carol asked, her voice gentle. "Maya Torres," she replied, extending a hand. "Thank you so much for coming so quickly. Thank you for making the call." Carol said warmly, "and for stopping the work. You did the right thing." The rescue team laid out their equipment on a clean tarp: crates, soft blankets, medical kits, and specialized gloves. It was all done with a hushed reverence, like preparing for a delicate surgery. Carol knelt by the edge of the pit, her movements slow and deliberate so as not to cause any more distress. "Okay, let's see what we have," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Gently, using a small, soft, bristled brush, a team member cleared away some of the loose dirt. The first kitten was lifted out. It squirmed in the gloved hand that held it, letting out a weak, sputtering growl that was far more fierce than its tiny frame should allow. The second one was next. It had a small, crimson scratch across its nose, a stark reminder of its violent awakening into the world. It was placed carefully into a warm, blanket-lined carrier. Then came the third, trembling so violently that flakes of dry soil shook from its patchy fur. "3," Carol said, her brow furrowed in concentration. She scanned the collapsed den. But there should be more. The litter sizes are typically 2 to 4. The team searched the pit meticulously, their hands sifting through the remaining debris. The earth had been stripped bare. The hole was empty. Hope began to fade. The construction crew watched from a respectful distance, their faces etched with concern. "Maybe the mother moved one before the excavator got here," Howard suggested quietly. Carol didn't answer. She knelt lower, pressing her ear to the compacted earth at the corner of the pit, a place where a larger mass of roots had been uprooted. A heavy, expectant silence fell over everyone. The only sound was the wind whispering through the nearby pines. Then, Carol's eyes widened. "I hear something," she whispered. "Breathing. It's so faint." Instinctively, she began to dig with her bare hands, pushing away the tangled layers of roots and packed soil with a desperate urgency. The earth was dense, and for a moment, it seemed hopeless. Then her fingers brushed against something soft and warm. She worked faster, clearing away the last of the dirt. There, almost completely buried, was the fourth kitten. It was the smallest of them all, its body limp and covered in a thick layer of suffocating soil. Its fragile chest was barely moving, its breath shallow and almost imperceptible. The rescue team held their breath as Carol carefully lifted the tiny, still form. Maya felt her own heart clench in her chest, a painful, sinking feeling. The kitten looked lifeless. In that moment, the entire vast construction site, with its million-dollar machinery and ambitious timelines, seemed to revolve around the 4 trembling, fragile creatures, one of which was fighting for its very next breath. The ride to Big Cat Rescue was a blur of quiet efficiency and hushed, hopeful words. The kittens, now bundled into warm, padded carriers, were the most precious cargo Maya had ever seen transported. Once at the sanctuary's state-of-the-art veterinary hospital, a team led by Big Cat veterinarian doctor Justin Borstein was waiting. Experts had already determined that their mother was unlikely to return. The disruption to her den was too catastrophic. Instinct would drive her to abandon the site and preserve her own life. Reunification was impossible. These orphans were now entirely dependent on human care. The 4 kittens were given names by the staff. Dutton, for his robust, take-charge nature. Lou, for the quiet way she observed the world. Kay, for her surprisingly loud and demanding cry. And Mare, named for the nightmarish ordeal she had survived. Dr. Borstein's examination was a marvel of gentle precision. Each kitten, tiny enough to fit in the palm of his hand, was placed on the sterile metal table. He performed a thorough checkup, blood tests to screen for infectious diseases, the first round of vaccinations, deworming medication administered with a tiny syringe, and a careful treatment for fleas. Mare, the little one who had been buried, received the most attention. Her breathing was still shallow, and she was worryingly cold. She was placed in a small incubator where the warm, humid air could help her tiny lungs recover. Maya watched through the observation window, her heart aching with every fragile breath the kitten took. Initially, all four were carefully bottle-fed a specialized kitten formula every few hours. Their tiny, eager mouths latched onto the rubber nipples, a primal instinct to survive kicking in. But Carol was clear about the long-term plan. "The bottle is a temporary measure," she explained to Maya, who had stayed long after the construction crew had gone home. "As soon as they're stable, we'll start weaning them. The goal is to keep them wild. They need to learn that food comes from a bowl, not a human hand. They can never associate us with being their providers. Their survival depends on it." Over the next few days, the kittens stabilized. Mare, against all odds, began to thrive. Her breathing evened out, and her appetite matched that of her siblings. The incubator was removed, and she joined the others in a cozy, hay-filled enclosure. Soon, they were ready for the next stage of their rehabilitation, a sprawling 4,600 square foot outdoor enclosure designed to mimic their natural habitat. It was a bobcat's paradise, complete with fallen logs for climbing, dense shrubs for hiding, and a shallow pool for them to discover water. It was here that their true education would begin, with as little human contact as possible. Cameras were set up so the team could monitor their progress remotely. In this new, wild classroom, their individual personalities blossomed. Dutton, the largest and boldest, quickly established himself as the leader. He was almost twice Kay's weight, a bruiser with an insatiable curiosity and a healthy dose of aggression. He was the first to tackle the stuffed prey the keepers left for them, shaking it with a ferocity that hinted at the formidable predator he would one day become. Kay was the smallest, but she had the biggest voice. She was a tiny firecracker, especially at feeding time, her loud chirps and mews echoing through the enclosure as she demanded her share. Though petite, she was fearless, often instigating wrestling matches with her much larger brother. Mare, the survivor, was more cautious. Her face was a lighter shade of tan than the others, and a small patch of fur on her back had been shaved for treatment. It had been feared she might have mange, a result of the stress and trauma, but fortunately, it was just a deep scrape from the excavator's bucket. She carried her near-death experience in her demeanor. She was watchful and hesitant, but also incredibly resilient. She would often find the highest perch on a log and survey her new kingdom with wise, knowing eyes. And then there was Lou. She remained the quietest, the observer. While her siblings tumbled and fought, Lou would often sit to the side, her gaze flicking between them, processing, learning. The small scratch on her nose, a faint scar from her collision with the machinery, was a subtle mark of her past, but her focus was entirely on the future. Their mother took very good care of them before the accident, Carol observed one afternoon, watching the hidden camera feed with Maya. They're all in remarkably good health, all things considered. They have a fighting chance. The rehabilitation plan was set. For the next several months, they would live in the enclosure, learning to hunt. The staff would introduce live, but pre-stunned, mice and small birds into the habitat, allowing the kittens' natural predatory instincts to awaken. They needed to prove they could hunt and kill for themselves efficiently and consistently. When they were 6 or 7 months old, bigger, stronger, and fully independent, all 4 would be released together, back into a protected stretch of Florida wilderness far from any construction sites. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Back at the site, the foundations were poured. The steel skeleton of the building rose into the sky, and the project was back on schedule. But something within Maya had shifted. The blueprints and deadlines no longer held the same singular importance. She found herself driving to Big Cat Rescue every weekend. She never went inside the rehab area. She respected the critical rule of no human contact. Instead, she would stand at a designated distant observation point, watching through a pair of binoculars. She saw them grow. Their spotted coats became sleeker, their movements more fluid and confident. The clumsy, playful tumbles of kittenhood were slowly being replaced by the silent, stalking grace of a predator. She watched them chase after dragonflies, practice pouncing on rustling leaves, and fight with a new intensity over the food that was delivered to them. A sharpness was forming in their eyes, the wild, untamable glint of an animal that belonged to the forest, not to the world of men. One afternoon, she watched Dutton successfully stalk and catch a mouse. He dispatched it with a swift, clean bite, a perfect execution of an instinct he'd never been taught. A short while later, Mare, the quiet survivor, stealthily crept up on a small bird, her body low to the ground, a picture of focused lethality. A smile touched Maya's lips, genuine and deep. The sight didn't make her sad. It filled her with an immense sense of pride and peace. She had not tamed them. She had not saved them to be pets. She had simply given them a chance to become what they were always meant to be. The day she had ordered the excavator to stop, she thought she was sacrificing her career for a moment of sentimentality. She had braced herself for angry calls from investors, for a black mark on her record. But the story had gotten out. The local news had picked it up, and the response from the community and even the investors had been overwhelmingly positive. Her company had lauded her quick thinking and compassionate leadership. Her decision hadn't been a liability, it had become a hallmark of her character. But standing there, watching 4 young bobcats preparing to reclaim their birthright, she realized the true reward wasn't the professional accolades. It was this. It was knowing that the most meaningful and enduring structure she would ever help build wasn't made of concrete or steel. It was the future she had secured for these 4 wild souls. Her legacy wouldn't just be written in blueprints and city skylines, but in the silent, padded footprints they would one day leave on the floor of the Florida woods, free and wild, exactly as they were meant to be.